An island with no way to run, a threat rising inch by inch, and a price tag that could bankrupt a nation or save it. They say the ocean always takes back what was once its own, and for Singapore, time is running out. The water is rising, creeping silently higher each year. For most nations, it's a distant threat, a slow-motion disaster on the horizon. But for the tiny island of Singapore, with 6 million souls and no mountains to climb, this is today's crisis. One study warns mean sea level around Singapore could climb 1.15 meters by 2100, and with storm surges and high tides, inundations of 4 to 5 meters are possible. In the past decade, even Singapore's beloved East Coast Park has been flooded during high tides. A third of the island lies barely a meter above the highest tides, and nearly 30% is under just 5 meters of elevation. As one expert grimly noted, they've got nowhere to go. They've got to stop the water coming in. In a city nation carved from the sea, every street, every building is on reclaimed land. Changi Airport, Marina Bay, the East Coast, all stand on shores that used to be ocean. Now, those very shores could be swallowed again unless Singapore raises the line of defense. To overcome this problem, this tiny island nation, one of the richest and most advanced on Earth, is now racing to build a colossal wall of concrete, steel, and engineering genius, not to win a war, but to survive one. But can even Singapore's $100 billion plan to build 3 artificial islands, a new reservoir, a climate fortress rising from the sea can buy safety for Singapore from the rising tide? You are watching Construction Wars. Before we dive deep into our today's video, hit that subscribe button and also tell us in comments section which project would you like us to cover in our next video. In November 2023, Singapore's National Development Minister unveiled a bold plan. Long Island, a $100 billion gamble to literally reshape the map. The proposal calls for 3 colossal artificial islands stretching along the East Coast. Together, they would cover about 800 hectares, roughly twice the size of Marina Bay, and they would be built at a higher elevation than the current coast. Imagine a fortress of concrete rising from the sea, an enormous barrier that pushes the shoreline outward, keeping the water at bay. These new islands won't be empty mudflats. Engineers plan to encase them with massive concrete caissons, giant hollow boxes sunk onto the seabed. Each caisson could be as long as 50 meters, forming a rigid seawall foundation. Once in place, they'd be filled with dense material and topped with engineered fill to create solid ground above the waves. On top of this armored base, Singapore would build new housing, parks, and even industrial zones, turning a coastal defense into prime real estate. Inside the 3-island chain, the plan calls for an enclosed water body that becomes a freshwater reservoir. It would function like a giant East Coast marina barrage. When the tide rises, giant tidal gates and pumps shut, locking the saltwater out. When it rains hard, the gates open to pump stormwater away to sea. PUB, Singapore's water agency, says this reservoir will increase the nation's water supply while slashing the number of needed flood control pumps from 12 down to just 2. In effect, Long Island would become both a seawall and an 18th reservoir for the country. The scale is staggering. To hold back an angry sea, planners envision a coastline-turned citadel. Each segment of Long Island must be raised well above today's high water mark. Detailed studies will determine the exact elevation, but one concept shows ridges of land acting like waves frozen in time, crashing outward to meet the ocean. Locking out the sea requires more than land. Singapore's engineers are proposing centralized tidal barriers akin to the Marina Barrage on an industrial scale. 2 massive gates, essentially ship-sized floodgates, would span the main inlets. When a storm surge or exceptionally high tide threatens, hydraulic engines would slam them shut, sealing off the reservoir. Beneath the surface, high-capacity pumps would keep rainwater from backing up. This system would be the heart of Long Island's defense, an enormous mechanical dam hidden beneath waves. But building it won't be easy. Singapore is already the world's largest sand importer. Every bit of new land costs untold tons of sand. In fact, it spent decades dredging neighboring coasts to reclaim land until its neighbors shut off the taps. The Long Island plan will need engineered fill, possibly concrete, seawall rubble, even recycled material, rather than sand trucked in at high cost. That's why the caisson method is key. Float in giant concrete shells, sink them down, then fill them on site, reducing the need to dredge and ship in millions of cubic meters of material. This float-in strategy has precedent. Singapore's famed Tuas terminal expansion and even local high-rise basements have used movable caissons. The Long Island team would scale this up. 6-deck-high walls of reinforced concrete installed in series. Between caissons, they'd installed geotextile tubes and filters to allow water through without letting sand leak. Over the years, these segments would be filled and merged, forming a solid landmass rising from the depths. Every piece will be designed for longevity, 150-year service lives by some estimates. Engineers will likely build each landmass step by step. First the barrier and reservoir, then the land reclamation. During construction, it will be a decades-long choreography of dredgers, cranes, divers, and barges, all working in concert to tame the deep sea. But at what cost? For a nation of just 780 square kilometers, Long Island means gigantic impact. Environmentalists warn that any massive reclamation will disrupt marine ecosystems. Singapore has already lost over 60% of its coral reefs to past landfills. Dredging and construction stir up sediment that smothers seagrass, destroys nursery grounds, and can even release trapped carbon from the seabed. Those are debts that the sea collects quietly. Friends of Marine Park Chair Stephen Beng cautions we may not fully repair these reefs for generations. He points out that nature's resilience has limits. If every project takes a toll, Singapore's last remaining wetlands and shores could be irrecoverably damaged. One must wonder, is building one megastructure just to combat climate change inadvertently speeding up it? Singapore's leaders are keenly aware of these worries. Plans call for environmental impact studies and even nature-based solutions to soften the blow. For example, some diagrams show new mangrove belts and artificial reefs around Long Island's edges to give fish and corals a foothold. Officials say public consultations and design tweaks will try to minimize harm, but critics remain cautious. Can floating caissons and pumps truly replace the complexity of a reef? Time will tell if the technocrats' promises hold water. Making Long Island a reality won't happen overnight. First, 5 years of studies are slated to start in 2024. Geotechnical surveys, hydrodynamic models, and environmental assessments will fill thick dossiers. By the early 2030s, Singapore hopes to break ground on the first island, but even then, it will be just the beginning. Experts predict construction could stretch beyond 2050, easily spanning several decades. This is a half-century marathon, not a sprint. The Prime Minister has framed it as the ultimate long-term infrastructure bill. My guess is probably $100 billion over 100 years, a 50 to 100-year solution. Singapore's approach is to budget it like military defense. Steady multi-generational funding. It's a sum dwarfed by national GDP, but staggering for a single project. In return, Singapore gets something priceless, a chance at survival. By extending the coastline, Long Island would not only shield homes and Changi Airport from floods, it creates 20 kilometers of new parks and waterfront, triple the existing East Coast Park's length. Imagine new beaches, marinas, and even waterfront neighborhoods, all built atop what was once ocean. Desmond Lee suggests these islands could host homes, workplaces, and recreation for future generations, balancing the cost with opportunities. Yet, as with any colossal gamble, there are no guarantees. Sea level projections could outpace expectations, weather patterns might shift, or better solutions might emerge by mid-century. Will Singapore still need this bulwark if graphene filtration removes saltwater from rivers? These uncertainties haunt the planners. And there's the public cost. Could other climate measures get sidelined by this one all-consuming project? Singapore stands at a crossroads. One road leads to these new islands, concrete bulwarks shielding a city against the rising sea. The other path asks if Singapore should raise every building, construct even higher seawalls, or find 1,000 smaller adaptations rather than one megastructure. For now, the government has chosen to bet on Long Island. In the coming years, Singaporeans will watch as engineers and environmentalists clash and collaborate on this vision. Will the $100 billion fortress hold back the waters? Or will it crumble under the weight of nature's own fury? The story of Long Island is still being written in wind-tossed harbors and meeting rooms full of maps. What do you think? Can this engineering marvel save Singapore's future, or are there better ways? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this deep dive compelling, smash that like button, subscribe to Construction Wars, and ring the bell for our next cinematic journey into the world's greatest building battles. Because for places like Singapore, the war against the sea is far from over, and we all need to know how the story ends.